So we're going to do a little review from Messiah's Mansion. So some of this, like I said, some of this will be review. This part will definitely be review if you remember the first tent you went into. There were 6 different kinds of sanctuaries. They mentioned 9, but 4 of them were all on the earth. I'm just going to give you the 6 different kinds of sanctuaries there were, and they're right there in your notes that I gave to you. One was the heavenly sanctuary, right? There's a number of verses there that share that there was a heavenly sanctuary. There was an earthly sanctuary, obviously. We see that right there, evidence of that. And there was different ones, earthly sanctuaries. There was Solomon's temple. There was Zerubbabel's temple. Okay. Then Jesus is a temple. Remember he said in John chapter 2, he said that destroy this temple and in 3 days I'll rebuild it. He was talking about himself, it says in the book of John. So there's the third one. Number 4 is we, individuals, we can be a temple for the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. Know ye not that your body is the temple of God? It gives three verses I shared with you there. Number 5 is that God's church, or God's people, is a temple. We're lively stones. Where Jesus is the chief cornerstone, we're lively stones, it says, built up unto a house for God. And Jesus is that chief cornerstone. And then number 6, God and Jesus themselves are the temple. Because Revelation 21, 22, John is seeing in vision there, he saw the new heavens and the new earth. In the new earth, he says there was no temple. Why? Because it says the Father and the Lamb, the Son, are the temple thereof. So we see 6 different kinds of sanctuaries there. So let's look a little further now and go and see what the construction of the sanctuary was all about and see a little bit of the symbolism of that as well. First, we're going to look at the fence around the courtyard. Okay? And I gave you the verses of where if you'd like to go sometime and read about that, that's where those verses are. There was 20 brass pillars on the north side. There was 20 brass pillars on the south side. 10 brass pillars on the west and on the east. Okay. It totaled 150 feet lengthwise, 75 feet widthwise. And the fence was made of fine twined linen on 3 of the sides and partially on the 4th side. The 4th side that was partial was the east side here. And I'll get to why it was partial in a second. But that linen was white. And what does white represent?
Purity.
Purity. Yeah, purity, righteousness. It was 7.5 feet tall. So you're not going to just step over and walk into the courtyard. You had to climb your way over if you're going to get into that courtyard. It wasn't easy to get in. And yet, on the east side, there was a gate of the court. It was 30 feet in width there. And that gate had in it a curtain that was white, blue, purple, and scarlet. White represents, we said, purity, righteousness. Blue represents the law, or the commandments. It says that the law was written on a sapphire stone. It says, as the color of the heavens. And we know the heavens are blue. So, blue represents the law, commandments. Purple, royalty. And scarlet representing sacrifice. Blood, right? The blood and sacrifice. So this is what the gate of the court was. In John chapter 10, Jesus says that I am the door. I'm the door into the sheepfold. He's the door in John chapter 10. He says that anybody else that comes in another way, what are they? They're a thief and a robber. So there's only one way into the plan of salvation, and that is through the gate, through Jesus. He's the door. Jesus says only through him is the way into the plan of salvation. So I want to look at the altar of burnt offering. The altar of burnt offering, as I gave you, there's brought out in Exodus 27 and 38. It was made of acacia wood, and it was overlaid with brass. You're going to notice that everything in the courtyard is brass, and everything in the tabernacle is gold. If you might remember from your tour that that the brass and everything is represented, because remember, that's earth. Everything in the courtyard represented the earth. The plan of salvation worked out on earth is in the courtyard. The plan of salvation worked out in heaven is in the tabernacle. Okay? So it was acacia wood or shittim wood, it's also referred to as in the Bible, and it was overlaid with brass. Now on this altar, you know what, I forgot I got my little pointer here. There it is right there. On that altar, it had four corners that had four horns. Four horns. Four horns represent in the Bible power. The power of the blood. Ever heard that song? There is power, power, wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb. There's power in the blood of the Lamb. And for Bible references for that horn equals power, 1 Samuel 2, verse 1, and Psalm 89, verse 17. Gives us an equation of horns and power. Also, they had, along with the altar burnt offering, they had utensils there, shovels, basins, flesh hooks or forks, fire pans for the ashes. Okay. So those were all, again, made out of brass. At the underneath the rim of there, or the shelf of the altar burnt offering, was a mesh, a brass mesh, or brass grate, and it was under the rim there, and it had at the end of it 4 brass rings. Now the way they transported the altar burnt offering and the furniture here, they carried it. The Levites carried it. The priests were the ones that officiated in the sanctuary, but the Levites were the ones that were responsible for the upkeep and the care of the sanctuary. And the Levites were the ones that transported the sanctuary when it had to go from place to place. And so they had these 4 rings on the corners there, and then they had staves or rods that were made of shittim wood and overlaid with brass, and they would stick those, you can imagine sticking those rods through the rings and on both sides, and you could pick it up. So they had 4 rings there, so they could pick that up and carry that. There were various offerings that were put on the altar, and we're going to get into that next week, what the different offerings were. You probably might have heard of some of the offerings: a meal offering, a drink offering, a trespass offering, a sin offering, a burnt offering. A number of different offerings that were offered, and they all had specific purposes. All had specific symbolization of what they represented. So we're going to get into that next week, what all those offerings were. But this here, the altar burnt offering, that is where sin was dealt with. That is where sin was dealt with, is at the altar burnt offering. Even though the lamb was slain, remember, on the north side, remember from the tours, but they took the fat and the lamb, and they burnt it where? On the altar burnt offering. Okay. And the blood was poured on the horns there. So sin was actually dealt with at the bronze altar there. In Leviticus 6, it tells us that this fire was not to go out. When they did their first offering with Aaron and Moses, the Lord came down, consumed that offering, and the Lord told them that fire was never to go out. You may remember the story of Nadab and Abihu, 2 sons of Aaron. They came in with strange fires. There's a common fire. They didn't use the fire that God told them to use. He said only use the fire that He provided. But because they didn't, they were struck down. So God was very specific. God is very specific about His instructions of what He asks us to do. But He doesn't ask us to do anything that's, unbelievably difficult that we'd have difficulty doing. When He asked Adam and Eve not to eat of the one tree in the garden, He gave them many, many trees in the garden to eat of. He only asked them not to eat of one. So God's requirements He has are not so difficult that we couldn't carry them out. He asks us to do certain things, and He's very specific about the things He asks us to do.